I've been a loser my whole life. I know what you're thinking. How can you be a loser? You're a girl. Being a loser exists more in the male caste system. First of all, that isn't entirely true. Being a loser is a universal feeling. Certainly now in the West, with the pressures of entering the workforce, finding a suitable partner, parental approval, financial standing, etc., affecting both men and women. However, I think it works in different ways for men and women, respectively. Obviously, we have different social standings. Men have a socio-sexual hierarchy, whereas women in the tribe tend to have more social relationship based systems. But that's not really what I want to talk about. The feeling of being a loser within yourself and to yourself is what I want to talk about. Even though your peers may not think you appear so, or maybe they do, it's a feeling that transcends sex differences. Especially now because of the current way we live, for the most part, men and women are forced to do the same things work wise and socially. But if you felt like a loser or subpar to others for most of your childhood, the entire way you aim to live your life is shifted, and your whole life trajectory becomes so different to what it could have been had you had that little extra confidence growing up. And that's kind of insane to think that. I struggle with anxiousness. I don't want to say anxiety because nowadays it's a bit of a throwaway term. I don't need to be diagnosed with it, it's just the way I am. And it's been a concurrent theme throughout my life, contributing to this feeling of inadequacy. From a young age, I would never engage in activities or social clubs. I would cry. I was taken to join the kids' football team at age 4 or 5, cried, ran home. Ballet, I wish I'd stuck at that, but no, I got too upset and my mum had to join me in every session. And then after a while, she didn't bother taking me, which I completely understand. Later on, I did martial arts, but after a couple of years, that soon came to an end too. First day of school, that was the same. I cried. I didn't want to leave the safety of home, the familiarity. I was in this environment with these kids I didn't want to be around. I felt like I was being punished to be sent to school. And knowing that I had to do that for the next 13 years of my life was just utterly soul destroying. And I'm a very studious person. I love learning, but it had nothing to do with that. I hated, I still do hate, and have a lot of anger for teachers and the tyranny of the classroom. I couldn't stand shouting or kids misbehaving and constantly having this dread and anticipation of the class being reprimanded, for something I was completely innocent in. I just hated the injustice of it. Constantly, I was constantly in fight or flight mode, but you can't leave, you can't run away legally. So you're just stuck and you just become this ball of tension and suppression. And all the while, you feel guilty subconsciously, even at a young age, for worrying your parents or how you appear to your classmates, your friends. And this feeling lasted me all the way through senior school and to some extent college, sixth form. I had no friends for the first 3 years of secondary school. I would eat my lunch in the toilet, worrying, getting worked up about whether I had certain teachers after lunch. Because people don't want to be around you when you're so negative all the time. Whittling about things they aren't worried about. Because most people didn't seem to care at school. I always felt that I always felt that I felt things so much more than my peers. So naturally, you have a feeling of alienation. But long enough of that feeling you start leaning into it, of being the weirdo. And at the beginning, it's something you naturally are, and there's nothing wrong with it. But once you start leaning into this feeling, your ego kind of builds this wall around you. And these things that are just concerns and feelings end up becoming your whole personality. And that's where the danger is, because that isn't who you are, but for a time it influences your decisions. So naturally, I went against the grain with everything. I didn't go to university, I didn't get an apprenticeship. And that was a bit of a no no at school when I was there. Schools and colleges are so kind to you and helpful if you make them look good on paper. I think I'll do a video about this, why schools are just evil places, at some point in the future. If you're planning on doing some part-time work, or having a year off to re-engage with life and not being stuck indoors under LED lights for like 8 hours a day, well, no, you're a failure. You need to get a job, get a career straight away. If you want to do that, the school wipes their hands with you, basically. And I, like many of you probably, did well at school. I was quite intelligent. Um, I did well in exams, especially English and history, media studies, music, for example. Um, quite right hemisphere of the brain oriented subjects, I guess. Various members of staff would tell me they couldn't believe I was applying to uni. So I must have been doing something right. So the continual feeling of being a misfit still occurs now because I don't have a full time job. And in this current climate, I would not get one. I get by doing various labour work, bar work. Honestly, it keeps you more grounded. I don't think I could ever work for a corporation or in an office, and I'm lucky enough to still live at home. So I don't have such a strong feeling of being trapped anymore. And I've finally accepted this feeling of alienation and the label of loser, and I've kind of integrated it into my personality. So, how does being a loser become your superpower? When you're someone who has built this wall, this veneer of a weirdo personality, of a social outcast, liking very uncool things, not doing what your childhood friends did, not being able to handle situations as aptly as others, or, you know, making yourself very difficult to be liked or approachable, it makes you a very inward person. I think you develop a very complex inner monologue, which actually enables you to interact more efficiently with normal society further down the line because you are able to tap into this kind of inner wisdom that you gain. And when you have that confidence, it helps you whether you like it or not. Because ultimately, all those feelings of inadequacy you feel, you tend to sublimate them into your own productivity, whether that be working really hard on the things you found cool and interesting, the things that really mattered to you, the things that helped you escape your reality sometimes when it was too much. And I guess the other big thing I believe is diving deep into why you felt the way you felt, why you felt different, which can, and certainly did for me, send you down so many rabbit holes where you can just absolutely level up how you view life and gain so much knowledge, so much spiritual knowledge and worldly knowledge, so that you begin to ask more questions, which will give you answers you don't want to hear but must sometimes. Because where we are in society, we don't have real teachers anymore. Generations above you can't teach you any kind of inner work, I don't think, because a lot of people across generations are a mess. It feels as if people of the last 80 plus years, like, none of us are equipped to live as we do now. It's just some are able to manage it better than others. That's my opinion. Um, the mentor archetype is all but gone for men and women, except it still exists in characters you read in books or certain myths. And now I guess the modern equivalent is people on the internet. Um, that's the best way I can think of it. And ultimately, I think to feel like a loser is kind of a God given path for you to enable you to become enriched as a person. And you already have something that no one else can take away from you, which is your experience. You've had a struggle, which in a sense has paid off to have. I wouldn't say being the way I was for so long has left me without any issue, because it definitely hasn't. And I'm forever a student of this mortal coil. But I am more gladly now. I don't see it as I do sometimes, but I try to embrace it rather than resist it. And I think I've become at peace with it. I think you gradually become at peace with it. It's through the journey you take to become an improved individual. If you're like me, you were probably thinking at some point, maybe I'll get to the point where I can go out and talk to normies, do what my peers always did, and blend in at a regular job and work my ass off to become successful. Then at some point along the way, you realize that you've already surpassed many of these people without realizing. You'll know more about yourself, about the world, and about what life is and where it's headed more than, any of these people ever will, simply because you've been given the incentive to question it. You know, you can engage with normal society easier, but you no longer want to. Equally, I don't think it's really healthy long term to be a complete social pariah. Sometimes blending back in can be good for you as well, as to not lose touch with what's happening in kind of the quote unquote normie world. Because ultimately, the society you still live in is built for those people, so it will affect you indirectly. You know, uh, Lots of these people are going to work each day and they're on a cocktail of caffeine, anti anxiety medication, antidepressants just to get by. And if they weren't, probably they'd probably blow their brains out. And that sounds awful, or they couldn't do it. They wouldn't be able to get through each day. And I understand that when you get to a point where you have a family to support and a house to finance, you can't just back out of something so easily. This is particularly poignant nowadays where we're just living in a ridiculous economy. But while I'm young and relatively free, I want it to stay that way for a while. I'm not financially rich, I'm not socially rich, but I found a balance where I'm mostly content. There's no career ladder I want to climb. Eventually, I want to work for myself and, have a family. But even a simple notion like that, I've had to reason with that with myself and with others, that that is an acceptable path in life and that it's enough. But again, this is the inner work that you have to do, and that being a loser helps you to do. You are the alchemist of your inner gold, and you can control what you think and how your soul interacts with the world. Having that, as a naturally occurring disadvantage in your younger life, inadequacy, little self assurance, zero confidence, I really believe, if you follow the right path that it sends you on, I really believe it allows for you to you eventually have this kind of bursting from the cocoon moment. Not appearance wise, I'm not referring to that at all. But, you know, you acknowledge it because the contrast between how you were and why you were like that versus how you are now, it becomes so apparent. I'm so different to how I was. I no longer want to be untalkative to people my own age. I went through a phase where I found it impossible to talk to people my own age. I felt I had nothing in common with them, except for a couple of friends of childhood that I kept in touch with. But now I'm kind to everyone who's kind to me. I don't worry about saying something they find odd or them finding my pastime strange or just finding me a strange person. I've got over it. But I will still go and spend my days down the garden and my evenings reading and writing or playing a game. And I won't feel guilty or bad for disappointing someone who wants to go out on the lash or elder relatives being concerned that I don't seem to have many relationships. What matters to some people is quite negligible for others. And that's why we're different. And in the future, as we stand now, the divide will become larger for these people who are able to lift the wool from their eyes and those who will continue to live in ignorance. And I think being a loser, especially early on in life, it gives you the tools to lift the wool. Am I still a loser? Absolutely. Do I care anymore? No, not at all. It, it's what makes me who I am. And however uninteresting I am to one person, I might be the most fascinating person in the world to another. And ultimately that doesn't even matter either because I've done myself the service of becoming soulfully enriched. You know, however far along the journey that may be. I'm already miles ahead of most, and I'm sure you are too. As always,